I want to mention that last year a political consultant made the comment that 2018 will be a transformational year in Oklahoma politics. And the reason for that is that we have every statewide elected office up for grabs. We have, of course, at least one congressional seat. We have all of the House, half the Senate, at least two state questions, and hovering over all of this are questions about the future of our political parties. Will Democrats make a comeback? Will Republicans continue to dominate? Will Libertarians enlarge their footprint with a third-party gubernatorial primary? So I would like first to turn to Ms. Pollard and ask a question. Republicans rule the roost, and yet in this state, many people are unhappy with the economy, low educational achievement, overcrowded prisons. Critics will say tax breaks given to corporations and the poor paid less attention to. So I'd like to ask you to make the case for keeping all of these seats we now have in Republican hands.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that question. And I think all you have to do is look back on history just a little bit and look and see the reforms that the Republicans have made throughout the state. Where were we 12 years ago before Republicans had control of our state House, our state Senate, and then the governors, and then all the statewide electeds? Where were we before that? The teachers' retirement system was only funded at 46%. Now it's funded at over 71% for the teachers' retirement funds. The Democrats, whenever they would draw short on funds, they would borrow from those systems. We will not do that. Our roads and our bridges. We had over 700 deficient roads and bridges that the United States Department of Transportation was going to step in and start finding us more than what we were able to spend on our entire budget because money was taken from roads and bridges. We've dedicated funds in our 8-year transportation plan to go directly to roads and bridges. And now, do you know, we only have 250 instead of 700. There's only 250 left, and they will be fixed by the time of 2020 when the end of our plan comes out. Education. So many reforms in education. Now, let me say the first thing about education. We have 4 school teachers in our family. I'm from public education. We 100% support education. That is why we have made a priority. My church calls it a preeminence. You put it above all things to make sure that education is funded. It's actually in our Constitution to make sure we fund education. But one thing Republicans have done is try to give the power back to the people. You have much more freedom to do with your dollars today than what you had 15 years ago. So all of the different avenues we talk about, criminal justice reform, we all, according to the vote of the people, took a stance on being tough on crime. You know what? We've learned from that, haven't we? Tough on crime. We have to be very careful. We have to be smart on crime. We have started a thing in the Oklahoma Republican Party, and it's called Rebuilding Oklahoma and Rebuilding Oklahoma Families. People that are put in crime for very minor, if I could say, of course, felonies, but things that do not affect society and hurt other people, we're putting them in jail today. They don't need to be in jail. They need to stay with their families. They need to continue to have jobs. They don't need the stigma of having a record behind them. That's what the Republicans are fighting for in their criminal justice reform, and I can tell you, criminal justice reform will be passed this year.
Thank you. Ms. Langthorne, the Democrats in Oklahoma have been in decline really for more than a dozen years. To critics, they view them as having left the mainstream, become a party of, say, aggrieved populations, identity groups, in favor of big government, more taxes, unfriendly to traditional values. So please make the case to us that many more Democrats need to be elected.
I think the state of Oklahoma, literally the state of Oklahoma, makes the case for why Democrats should be elected. I am not sure that Pam and I are living in the same state. The state of our schools is in crisis. That's a fundamental fact. We may be funding teachers' retirements, but I would guess it's probably because we have fewer and fewer teachers. I'm glad to hear that we're working on criminal justice reform. I think that's something that hopefully we can address from a bipartisan perspective. But Republicans have had power over the state for nearly a decade, like you said, and I don't think that things are better. And I think most Oklahomans would tell you that their lives aren't better, that we continue to see crises And every single industry, whether we're talking about healthcare, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about infrastructure, across the board, our government is failing. So I think the case to be made for Democrats is, at the very bare minimum, something has to change, and we are offering that alternative.
Mr. Shepard, I know that you have been out polling recently and have some early results, some sense of the tendencies of voters, and of course no one knows what it's going to be like next year. But tell us, how are people feeling in terms of the direction of the state? Whether they feel like we're going in the right direction, the wrong direction, they have no idea, what?
Well, yes, and I feel like I'm kind of here to criticize both or compliment both. I don't know what I'm really
You can do
here
both.
to do, but I will. What I will say is that we've just come out of the field and doing some polling. We are finding that Oklahomans are about 10 points more likely to say that Oklahoma is going in the wrong direction than the United States is. And they're also about an equal amount saying that the state is worse off than it was 5 years ago. There are trends that we, I think, are beginning to see move that direction. I think some other questions that we've added that would be very important to Anna and to Pam is that we asked them a variety of different things, tasks in the state, and we said, who do you think does a better job, Republicans or Democrats? I will tell you, when it comes to running the state of Oklahoma, Oklahomans are still on the side of Republicans. About 55% say the Republicans still should be running the state. But when we ask them about funding K through 12 education, Democrats are beating Republicans about 44 to 40%. So the point is that, and that's 54% of our budget. So I think that, and I was trying to think up when I publish these results in the next few days, what I was going to say, but I think I was going to say something as to, ask the question, are voters beginning to lose faith in the Republicans' ability to run the state? They might be with them right now in polling data, but we're beginning to see some movement towards other things like deciding on which taxation is appropriate, funding core services, roads and bridges, health and human services, and we're seeing more and more people think that Democrats can do that better. So I think that we're kind of in a transitional period. I'm not so sure the public is ready to give up on Republicans, and I'm not so sure they're ready to fully embrace Democrats. I think it's in transition.
Ms. Langthorne, if you were to pick one or two issues that you think will drive the conversation in the elections next year, what do you think they would be? And I know we're taking out a crystal ball here.
Yeah, I think it's the same conversations that we've been having, hopefully just more in depth and more effectively regarding the budget and specifically education.
And Ms. Pollard, what is your view on what issues might be sort of dominant in the debates and the campaigns next year?
Solutions. They are looking at the Republicans to look and see what is going on in our state. What is different now than what was here 6 and 8 years ago? Oil and gas revenues. Where were we in the 80s, 83 to 88 time period, when the last time that oil and gas went down as low as it is right now? Do you know what happened in our state of Oklahoma? Do y'all remember Penn Square Bank? Remember the bank failures? That's what happened the last time. We lost so many citizens moving out of Oklahoma that in the next census, we actually lost a congressman because people leaving Oklahoma. This time, yes, sir, absolutely. We are going through tough economic times because our oil and gas revenue is down. But what happened this time under Republican leadership? Our unemployment rate, instead of being 8% back in the 80s, 4.4% today. It was 4.3% 6 months ago. It is tough times, but we have diversified, we have found solutions, and we're going to continue to hold public forums, public hearings like this to hear from the people. We are offering solutions, and we are fixing this. A little bit slower than what we want sometimes, but we are fixing Oklahoma.
Let me follow up and ask you, Donald Trump, how much of a factor do you think he will be in the elections next year, good or bad?
To me, what I'm hearing from people on President Trump, it's a little bit of a rural versus urban. In the urban areas, they're not as supportive of President Trump. But in rural Oklahoma, which is still the majority of the voters in Oklahoma, they support President Trump. 90% of the phone calls coming into our office tell us Republicans do not support President Trump enough. That's not what we hear on the news, but that is what I'm hearing. If it wasn't, I would stand here and tell you that we need to do something because the majority of voters say that he's going in the wrong direction. But people still say that President Trump is going in the right direction for our nation, and we are going to follow his lead here in Oklahoma.
Ms. Langthorne, your thoughts on Trump, the Trump factor? And
I think that President Trump's approval ratings tend to speak for themselves. I am hopeful that Oklahomans will see that he is not a fit leader for our nation.
Do you think it will filter down into the voting booth here for state offices and the legislature?
I think it'll have an effect. The degree of that effect, I'm not sure, but I think it will have an effect.
Mr. Shepard, your
Well,
thoughts?
just coming out of the field, Trump favorability in the state of Oklahoma is at 55%. So he's very favorable here. And when you talk about a Trump factor, I think we're focusing on the wrong person. I think it's Mary Fallin. Mary Fallin's unfavorable rating is 55%. So I think that if you're talking about what the impact will be on next year's elections, I think that Mary Fallin is more of a drag on the Republican Party than Donald Trump will be.
Ms. Langthorne, it's kind of startling to look at the list of candidates now who've registered to run for statewide elected offices. Other than the governor's race, there are 0 Democrats who are running. What's the issue with trying to get Democrats to run for these offices now?
Running for office is really hard and a very serious commitment, and rather than putting forth a dozen candidates who are not qualified, we're focusing on finding competent, qualified, professional candidates who will do their best to serve Oklahoma.
Ms. Pollard, part of the job for the state chairs is to help raise money. How is fundraising going for the Republicans?
Very competitive. Very, very competitive with the special elections, with the president, with some NRCC, with our Congress, our special elections in the Congress and in the Senate this year because of all the appointments, which, by the way, we should brag on Oklahomans and how many appointments have been made to the administration. Kudos to the state of Oklahoma. It is extremely competitive, but we know that we're going to be able to fund our candidates completely and look forward to doing that in the next year.
Do you think that, Ms. Pollard, that the results, what comes out of the special session, if we have one, and what comes out of the session in 2018 will have much of an impact on whether voters are disposed to vote for Republicans? I mean, teacher pay raise, taxes, do you think that will have much of an impact?
Yes, sir, I do. I think it will have a direct impact on next year's elections. And again, I stand behind our Republican leadership that we will offer solutions. We've begun to offer those solutions. There's a lot of things we need to fix and we need to change. We've done very good on the ones that we focused on, and now we're focusing on the next group. And we are going to have a good program coming out of our legislature.
Ms. Langthorne, what are your thoughts on whether you think the sessions will motivate voters to vote one way or the other?
Yes, I absolutely think the outcomes of both the likely special session and the 2018 normal session will have an impact. And specifically, if we're talking about solutions, the solutions that were offered by the Republican Party in the last session were just ruled unconstitutional. So I'm hoping that we have solutions that are actually legal solutions going forward.
Mr. Shepard, what is your thought?
Let me provide a little bit of criticism here to both sides, because I think we have to keep in context that the Republicans have been the majority for less than 20 years, where the Democrats ruled the state for 80 before that. And I think when Pam talks about oil revenues dropping, I think what it did was expose that we for so long had been so dependent on that we had not moved from a taxing products to taxing services. And I think even Mary Fallin tried to propose something that didn't really go anywhere at all. But I think it exposed that we have a much deeper problem. So I would say is that really my estimation, I think the Republicans had a rocky start in trying to become a governing party for so long that they haven't been. The problem that I have with Democrats, and where I think that Democrats will fall short, is because now the Democrat Party is devoid of conservative voices. When I've been a pollster now for 14 years, and when I started, Democrats were 52% of my sample, and Republicans were 32. Now it's the exact opposite. It has exactly flipped. What has not changed in that period of time is that 50 to 55% of Oklahomans identify conservative, 1 in 3 says they're moderate, and 15% says they're liberal. And as the Democrat Party has gotten smaller, the only voices coming out of the party are more liberal voices. And if they do not embrace more mainstream conservative ideas, in my opinion, they're going to be a minority party for some time to come.
Ms. Langthorpe, what do you think? Do you think there will be a rise of more moderate voices, or will that be a risk of compromising too much the tenets of the party, or what?
I honestly get confused when we talk about the Democratic Party not being moderate, because in my opinion, standing up for teachers getting fair wages is pretty moderate. Standing up for fair working hours is pretty moderate. Standing up for Oklahoma families having the ability to seek opportunity through a free market is pretty moderate. So I tend to reject the idea that the Democratic Party has moved so far to the left that we've left Oklahoma behind.
If you could find me just one pro-life Democrat, I would probably agree with
Leader
you. But,
Scott Inman.
well, we'll see how far that goes, but I'm saying is that if you look to 20 years ago, there was a lot more of that, and that's much more mainstream in Oklahoma, is being pro-life, is being conservative, fiscal policy. Teacher pay raise, I find 90%, 80% of Republicans support teacher pay raises. I find that on the Democrat side. I really don't think that's a partisan issue. Where I'm saying is that the partisanship has gotten into more social values that Oklahomans still embrace, conservative social values, and I'm finding fewer and fewer voices from the left that support those things.
But let me ask, do you think those social issues will play much of a prominent role as they have in the past in the next year's election? They seem to have diminished in somewhat, except in some areas that flare up, especially nationally. But, I mean, Mr. Shepard, do you really think that's going to drive
There's no
vote?
doubt in our polling data that we show that religiosity is going down. Fewer people are attending church. Fewer people identify as evangelical Christian. There's no doubt that there is some changes in the works where social voting or social the social values becoming the most important thing to voters. That's certainly not. Fiscal or economic issues have always reigned well there. But if I was to ask voters who they think is the strongest on economics, I think they would still find the Republicans, or they would not be wanting them to run the state. But where the Republicans are falling short is in this act of governing, the special session, and that's what you brought up earlier, I don't think will bode well for Republicans because, it's just what Anna said. It's another opportunity for the public to think, question whether these folks can really govern. And so I think there's been some real improvements, like Pam has talked about. But I'm not so sure. And as I said earlier, I think it's transitional. The Republicans are going to have to do something to recover, or they might find themselves not the governing party anymore in Oklahoma.
Ms. Pollard, any thoughts on that, just especially in terms of what I'm taking away from this is that are Republicans really going to show a commitment to funding core services in the state or to supporting core services?
Absolutely. Remember this. We, as a citizens, I voted for it, I'll admit it, that we made a constitutional amendment that we cannot raise taxes without 75% of our legislators. And remember, there's 101 people in the House. That means they take 74 of those, 75 to make it over, 75 votes in the legislature to raise taxes, or a vote of the people. This year, Republicans only had 72 members. The Democrats would not work with the Republicans. You want to know why things didn't get passed this year? Because they have somebody running for governor. Scott Inman said, we are only going to do it my way. And instead of the representatives representing their people and voting the way that their people in their districts wanted them to vote, they were very proud. And Scott Inman continues to brag to this day that they voted the way Scott Inman told them to. We want to reach out to the Democrats. We did reach out to the Democrats. We just need a few Democrats that are willing to work for Oklahoma. Let's not make our budget a Republican versus Democrat issue. This is not about Republicans and Democrats. This is about us. This is about our children. This is about our veterans. This is about our teachers. The Republicans in the House and the governor both wanted a teacher pay raise. We could not get it passed without the help of the Democrats. They refused to help. Let's talk to everyone, Republicans alike. I will lead the conversation. Don't make this partisan. Make it about Oklahomans.
Ms. Langthorne, your response to that take on what happened in the session.
I know that you just did the math for us, but I find it very hard to believe that if you were offering truly viable, productive, recurring revenue solutions, that you wouldn't be able to find 3 Democrats who would be willing to vote for it.
Oh, we did. As a matter of fact, the stuff that we offered were things that the Democrats had proposed the previous year and earlier in the session. But when it came to where he decided they were going to run for governor and we're going to hold our form and we're going to try to make Republicans look bad, listen, again, let's not make this partisan. Let's not make this about the 2018 elections. Let's make it about funding Oklahoma. Let's make it about funding our health care, funding our child services, funding the Meals on Wheels that they wanted to take away because they said they didn't get enough funding. Make it about that, take away the labels, and let's fix Oklahoma.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Ms. Pollard, I'd like to follow up with one quick question, then we'll turn to the audience, and Mr. Shepard might weigh in too. Are you concerned that with 3 Republicans running in the primary for governor, the word is that libertarians running, and more libertarians thinking of getting into the legislative races, that they will draw votes away from Republicans, exposing you to a loss in the governor's race or other races?
No, as a matter of fact, the votes will show that they took more votes away from the Democrats than they did the Republicans. So we have 7 Republicans, a very, very deep bench that is running as Republicans because they are leaders. They do have ideas. They do have solutions, each one individual, and I want everyone to reach out and listen to what they have to say. But we believe in free market. Same thing, we believe in free elections.
Mr. Shepard, your take on the effect of libertarians in the races?
I think libertarians right now, according to their registration, are a footnote to everything. I would say that really what we should be talking more about is independent voters. Independent voters that we see from their voting behavior register, but not as many vote as they should. We are showing that between 18 and 34-year-olds that are registered independent, that they are voting at a higher percentage. But I don't think libertarians are even going to cause any kind of ripple at all. If there's any ripple, it's from Democrats not voting or Republicans having greater turnout, which is what we've seen in the last few elections. And I'd like to comment on that because there is a portion of Democrats registered in the state of Oklahoma that have literally stopped voting. And we're going to find out why. We're going to call lapsed Democrat voters over the next couple of months and find out why you've stopped voting. Now, we've heard people say, well, it's because we live in a red state now dominated by Republicans, my vote doesn't count, and maybe we'll find that. But the point is that something has stopped them from voting. And you can go to Soonerpoll.com. We have a lot of information that's posted about doing this type of analysis.
I'd like to open it up to the audience. We have Sierra and Bess with microphones. Just raise your hand. Again, please keep your question to about 30 seconds. Make it a question, and so we can keep moving through topics in this limited time. Question right front here.
Pam and Anna, does either of you believe that the state can successfully address its financial problems and its fiscal problems without raising somebody's taxes?
I can tell you that is the solution that the Republicans are looking at right now when they're having meetings at the Capitol. That's exactly what we're looking for. But let me just caution one thing. We want to look at streamlining government, not taking services away from anyone. And that's what takes the research, and that's what they are looking into right now.
Ms. Langthorne.
Streamlining government requires cutting core services, and I know it makes everyone unhappy, but math is math, and if we want to have the revenue we need to fund the services we need, we have to pay taxes. That's the fundamentals of the social contract of a government. What we are trying to do is make sure that our tax structure is fair and that everybody is paying what they can afford to pay and getting the services they need to out of the government.
Let's go on to the next. Oh,
Can,
go ahead.
can I
Mr.
address
Shepard.
Warren? Because I want to give some context. And that is that when we asked voters, do you think that we have a spending problem in the state of Oklahoma, they say yes. When we ask them if there's waste, fraud, and abuse still happening in state government, they say yes. Now, we've seen over the last couple of years, Republicans come out of meetings and go, there's no more money to cut. It is. I mean, literally, there's nothing more to cut. We can't cut anymore. The problem is that the perception it has been built up for so long in the public that they still believe, no, there's still things to cut. And so I think that perception problem right now is one of the things that our state is suffering from.
Do voters also express support for more funding for education and some of the other core services? I mean, voters don't always, their different opinions don't always line up, right?
They do. But if we say that you have to cut something else to raise that, that's the hard questions that right now the Republicans are dealing with as the ruling party in the state, and they're having a tough time with it. It's the same problem that all of us would have if we were elected officials. I think that where the Democrats make the mistake is, they would certainly raise taxes, will fund core services, and then everyone who then paid a higher tax is then voting Republican the next time. So it's just this pendulum that's just swinging back and forth when we talk about type of tax policy and where money is being wasted, and if it is at all.
Question in this gentleman here.
Heard you talk about not cutting services. I'm one of the 400,000 veterans here in Oklahoma. Under the Republicans' watch, I have a man in Tallahassee. I'm the president of the State Oklahoma Democratic Party Veteran Committee. And I've often wondered why the Republican Party don't have a committee that sits on their central committee that brings veteran problems directly to our head of our Democratic Party like we do. But anyway, my question is, why don't we have, for example, a nutritionist at Tallahassee? I have a client, I'm a service officer, who they're feeding to death because they don't have a nutritionist. Norman has 100 names over their waiting list. Every rest home in Oklahoma needs money. And every one of them have been turned down. And the Republicans fought us on every corner. I went over and testified on the tax break for widows and the boys that get killed on the battlefield. If you get killed on the battlefield and you're from Oklahoma, your widow can't even get a tax break because of Republicans. The 84-year-old woman,
Sir, your question would be, why aren't there
why aren't
core
the Republicans doing more to help veterans?
Well, first of all, sir, I have to give you 100% respect for your service. My father was in the Air Force for 46 years. I was born in an Air Force hospital, so thank you for your service and thank our veterans for their service. I respect you greatly for that. I respect your compassion for your brothers and sisters in arms and the care that they need. First of all, a lot of your funding you're talking about is federal funding. Yes, sir. No, a lot.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, let her answer. That's all right.
Yes, sir. It's the same problem and the same question with every core set of services. Now, me as a veteran's daughter, do my heart more compassionate towards the veterans? You better believe it. Listen, you need to reach out. Have you talked to your legislature?
I talk to them every day. I testify
Okay.
over that 4 or 5 times.
All right. And what was the results of the studies that they have done on funding? What were they going to take the money from? Now, if I could send a lot more money to the veterans' homes, absolutely I would. Would I fund education more? Absolutely I would. Would I serve foster care and the elderly even more? Where's the money going to come from, sir? That's what Republicans are looking at. So Republicans are not here just to raise taxes on people. We are here to spend it. Now, I will say, when you look at the taxes in Oklahoma, and you look at, we're talking about, back to your question a little bit, sir, because it does play into your question, is why I'm merging them together. The governor, in looking that she has taken the lead since she became governor, there was over 120 boards, commissions, and agencies in the state. She has merged them and consolidated that government down to 77. often today. So we talk about the waste, we talk about the abuse, but we also talk about the merging of services so that we can better spend our dollars, so we can have more money to give directly to you, sir. That's where Republicans are looking for it.
Can I just add something? Can I add something? I mean, I heard the whole crowd literally yell more taxes. When I talk to Oklahomans, they think they're already overtaxed. So if you think we need to raise taxes, you need to convince the rest of the voting public who doesn't come to these forums, because those people are the people who are having the largest impact on our legislators, and legislators, particularly Republicans, don't want to raise taxes if the public doesn't support it. So if we start seeing that move in polling data, then I'm sure the Republicans and the Democrats would get together and raise more taxes. But again, this is where the public does not want more taxes. They don't have an appetite for it.
Thank you. Another question right here.
The Republican Party has been in charge of the state, as has a supermajority for 8 of the last 10 years. 8 of the last 10 years, we've had budget revenue failures. This year, the Democratic Party put out a plan that balances the budget, and it's not on the backs of working families, and the Republican Party failed to let it out of committee. The Republicans did not have a budget plan. The Democrats had a budget plan. Will you let the Democrats work in a bipartisan manner next in a special session to let the Democrats have a budget plan that balances the budget and actually funds core services?
The Republicans did listen to the Democrat plan, and it's, again, what he said, it's raising taxes. That is not what we think is best for Oklahoma, and it is backed up by what the citizens of Oklahoma believe. You need to get on the phones and listen to them. We don't vote just because the polls say so. We vote because of the phone calls that come into our legislature. Go to your representative and ask them for the results of their phone calls that come into their offices. They will tell you citizens do not want taxes raised. So therefore, we have to be responsible with the dollars that we have. That's where we're looking at. We have looked at the Democrats, and we want to work with them. Again, we offered some solutions. They said my way or the highway. They took the highway. We're in special session because of that.
Ms. Langthorne, let me ask you, what's your view on the need to raise taxes and by how much?
So first, I'd like to say there is a difference between raising taxes and not continuing to cut taxes. And that's part of the first problem with the narrative that Republicans refuse to raise taxes, is they say this after they have cut taxes years and years and years in a row. So we've cut our revenue and then are surprised when there's less revenue. So yes, we need to get back to the revenue that we started with and take a hard look at the services we need. But the reality is that Oklahomans deserve certain opportunities, and that those opportunities sometimes come from having a funded government. And we have to fund government, which means we have to sometimes raise taxes, but we should look at it in a responsible way and see where those taxes can be raised so that, again, we're not hurting Oklahoma families, because that's what the plans that were presented, the fees that were presented disproportionately hurt people who can't afford it.
Other questions? In the middle?
I have a question relating to voter turnout. And Governor Henry, yes, I know that was a long time ago, his last race, I worked on a Get Out the Vote campaign through Cherokee Nation. It started out as a native vote campaign and ended up being just throughout all of eastern Oklahoma for anyone, regardless of party or, any kind of issue that you were interested in. I think it was very successful. We had a huge voter turnout, and I would like to know, are there going to be efforts to do those kinds of initiatives and those kinds of campaigns?
Ms. Langthorne, what?
Yes. Voter turnout is very, very, very important to the Democratic Party, because honestly, when we look at the people who don't show up to vote most of the time, they are disenfranchised populations. They're communities of color, they're low-income communities, they're youth populations. And so those voters, their voices are just as important as the people who show up on a regular basis. And our values as being part of a democracy is that our democracy works better when more people show up. So it's our goal to get as many people to show up of any party as possible.
Can I say something about that?
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to put it to the audience. Maybe you haven't been to my website yet, hopefully. But what percentage of 18 to 34-year-olds that voted last November what percentage do you think that they are registered Democrat? Would anyone like to take a step?
Just go ahead and tell us.
80%? 40%? 60%? It's 38%. 48% of them are registered Republican. Now, mind you, these are 18 to 34-year-olds in the state of Oklahoma who voted last November, and almost half of them are registered Republican. I think that the Democrat Party's problem is that they pursue constituency groups that have low behavioral voting participation. And that is their problem. They want to talk about how young people are going to change Oklahoma. Young people right now are changing Oklahomans for the Republicans, not for the Democrats, according to the numbers according to our research. And so, and as I said earlier, there is a portion of Democrats that have just stopped voting, and we're going to try to find out why. But that's the biggest problem that the Democrats have moving forward in elections.
But you mean a problem in terms of the challenge of it, not a problem in terms of they shouldn't be pursuing their votes at all, right?
I don't understand your question.
Well, if they're marginalized populations, isn't the goal to re-engage these voters and bring them into the civic process?
I don't know exactly who you're talking about, Anna, as far as being disenfranchised, but they can easily register to vote and go vote just like any white Caucasian Republican can. I mean, what you got to drive them to the polls? You got to use a crowbar to get them out of their chair? I mean, okay, well that's.
Well, it's probably another discussion altogether, but let me ask Ms. Pollard, what do you intend to do to try to increase voter turnout from your party's
In
standpoint?
2010, the last time we had the statewide elections, I was actually in charge of the statewide voter turnout for the Republican Party. And the headline of the Tulsa World on Thursday after the election on Tuesday said, "Historic voter turnout." And I use this as an example everywhere I go, because what we did different, what the lessons that I learned from being in party leadership for almost 20 years, is that if I just call them and say, go vote, anything can come up and they will not have any reason to go vote. When we gave them reason and motivation to go out and vote, they got out and they voted. That's what we're going to do again this year. We're going to give them a reason to go vote. When you get them involved, they will put it into action. I'm very proud of our young Republicans in our state, that their numbers have just increased and grown in the last 3 and 4 years. We have direct, very aggressive outreach to the young Republicans, and I'm very grateful for them and the messaging that they are doing. Same with our Republican women. So I think that people are getting involved. They are seeing what we can do to help them, and they are turning out to vote.
And can I just add that if you look at the numbers too, Republicans are having a very easy time of doing that type of turnout, and they're changing parties in droves, and they're voting Republican. If you really want to try to figure out what's going on with the state of Oklahoma, that's what you have to look at and study, is because that's what the biggest changes are going on in our state. That's the reason why we have supermajorities of Republicans in our legislature now.
I want to turn to audience for questions, but one more. I want to ask Ms. Pollard, are you in favor of increasing the convenience for voting in Oklahoma? I mean, other states have many more avenues for being able to vote online, 30 days in advance, mail in the ballot. We have none of that. We have a lot of people will argue we have a lot of barriers to voting. Should we ease those?
Absolutely, and remember that the major changes that have been made have been authored by Republicans here in the last 5 years. We give kudos to Senator Holt for the changes that he has made. We do want to make it more easily accessible to the voters, because I can tell you, my mother was born in Ireland. I am first-generation immigrant from Ireland. I can tell you the look in my mother's eyes when she voted was still the look of, this is a privilege, and that's the way that I want to look at the voters. It is a privilege to get to vote, and that's how we want to reach out to them and make it accessible to all Oklahomans.
Another question over here. This lady here.
New York Times. This week.
You're from the New York Times?
No. Wish I were. That would mean I would speak very well. Reported, Oklahoma has an outbreak of syphilis that they've never seen before in Oklahoma. Almost eradicated in our lifetime. It's here again. Long-term chronic illness will result. We didn't take the Medicare expansion. We are fighting against ACA all the time. How will Republicans, since you're in the majority, how will Republicans address the serious health care of not only the opioid addictions now in Oklahoma, but syphilis that will hit our 18 to 34-year-olds, and when they can't get health care, I promise you, they're not going to look to Republicans for the solutions.
Well, let me
and I'll put
just
that
say-
to the Republicans and then also for the Democrats and how we look at.
Let me just remind the voters, and a lot of people don't understand this. When the Obama, no, I know you do, ma'am, you do, and that's why you asked me the question. I know you understand this, so I'm speaking to the audience that may not. When they offered the expansion of Medicaid, not Medicare, the expansion of Medicaid dollars, the federal government was going to expand it and fund it for 3 years. Now, anyone who has accepted that, 90% of that is on the states to pay for that now. How can we pay for that? What we need to do, ma'am, that we have good services here in Oklahoma. We need to do all we can to reach out to these people and show them where they can go for this help. Show me where people have been turned away from help. I think it's a matter of messaging and going out into our communities and telling these young people, here's where you can go for help, and the help is there.
Let me just bring up and ask Ms. Langthorpe. There's a plan, of course, that offers reinsurance to deal with some of the issues of coverage and we only have one insurer on the marketplace now. Are the Democrats in favor of this approach?
Generally, our opinion is that as many people should have access to health care as possible, and that we should work as hard as we can to find the policy that gets as many people as much access to health care as possible.
Well, that can't be the ACA because you just have one plan now available in that marketplace.
And I think everyone agrees that the ACA needs reforms. I don't think there's anyone who disagrees.
But that's why Republicans believe in medical care reform, not insurance policies. We need to lower the costs, and in order to do that, we bring more competition to the field, not try to get people to pay these exorbitant fees for insurance and then to have these large deductibles. That is what is hurting the common person. They're being forced to buy these policies. They still don't have coverage with these $6,000 and $8,000 and $10,000 and $13,000 deductibles. That is not covering them. Let's be more competitive with our health care and make it more accessible to the general population.
Okay, let's move on to the next
Just
question.
real quickly,
please.
I've polled Oklahomans. They want to repeal and replace.
Let's move on. There's a
for-
question up front here.
Thank you. Okay, so it seems like all of the problems, whether it's criminal justice or education or healthcare, all come down to Oklahoma's budget and how we get money. So I know even Mary Fallon has recently said that we have a structural budget deficiency, which means we are bleeding more money faster than we can raise it. So I'm not curious about your solutions because I've heard enough of those from both sides. I'm happy that you say them, but I am curious how you both think we got here. What got us to this point? Because from what I can see, a lot of it is the gross production tax and a lot of tax cuts across all platforms, but I'm curious what you both have to say, and the pollster too, of course. But what do you think got us to where we're at? Because I think that's really important in understanding how we can move forward.
Absolutely. And thank you. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask her first. Ms. Langthorpe.
I think you're right. I think it's tax cuts, that we started with a certain amount of revenue and decided that an ideological policy was better than a practical policy, and so we started cutting taxes, and then we ran out of money.
Oh, and I think the science and the mathematics will prove that it's not just the tax cuts, which, by the way, the Oklahoma legislature voted not to increase and not to continue with the automatic tax cuts that were voted in by the Democrat Party as much as the Republican Party. It is the revenue system. When we're talking about the governor talking about the revenue streams has changed, that Bill has alluded to it a few minutes ago, we're in a different day and age than what we were 10 years ago. We are are much more in an internet-based services. If you don't believe that, why did Amazon just buy out Whole Foods? You know, we are in a much more service-based industry instead of a manufacturing. The mom and pop stores, as much as I hate it, are going by the wayside. So our sales taxes are down. The number one, absolutely, when you look at the mathematics behind it, published mathematics, not political party mathematics, the oil and gas revenues is what has created the majority of this right now. Now, we have to find the solutions, but let me compliment you, and I really mean this, because none of us can offer solutions unless we first find out what the problem is. So thank you. That's exactly what your question is, of what we are looking into, what we have been looking into, and why I am so confident that Republicans are going to come back identifying these problems and offering these solutions. So thank you for that question.
Mr. Shepard, let me ask, the question was what got us to this point. So from your standpoint as a pollster, seeing trends of voting and engagement, what got us?
I think you were talking about what the structure, the structure of it. If I was to break it down into kind of a layman's term, I do that a lot for polling because I got to get the question, I got to remove all the legalese that these folks like to add to stuff. But the Republicans, in all fairness, want to run the state government like a nonprofit, where they only want to take in so much, and then they want to then spend it on core services or whatever government spending. And in doing so, they constantly are working in a budget deficit, which gives the Democrats a lot of opportunity to say that these folks can't govern, okay? I mean, that's just it. Trying to run it as a nonprofit. And then that always means that you're going to be running in a deficit situation. The Democrats, though, say, oh, there's a deficit, raise taxes, which then over the course of time, there's more money, which increases waste, fraud, and abuse, which got us into a Republican majority in the first place. So that's this swinging back and forth. Neither side has 100% of the answers to the problem, and both approach it from different perspectives, and that's the reason why we have a lot of swinging back and forth between parties and ruling.
I'd like to go to the woman on the left here. No, in the black coat. In the black coat. Right there.
Okay, my question's changed so much, I hope I can get this out. I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party, so I take a little bit of exception at how easily you guys sidelined we've got a very small party, but and you may correct me if this is wrong, aren't half of the eligible voters in Oklahoma, do they just not turn out? They just don't see any chance to make changes. They don't like what's going on, but they don't want higher taxes either. They don't like minorities being bullied. They care about so many things that aren't being addressed by the other two parties, and yet, you know, we just weren't taken seriously. And I'd kind of like to know why you're not a little more, give us a little more credibility.
Are you talking to me?
Shepard.
Maybe.
Sure, Mr. Shepard, go ahead.
Well, when I go into the field, less than half of 1% identifies libertarian. That's within the margin of error of every single poll that I do. It could literally have been 0 or it could have been 3 points. The point is that from a statistical perspective, it's such a small, insignificant number that it doesn't quite have an impact on any of the numbers or any of the things that we poll at. Quite frankly, you're going to have to build a party that is at least in the single digits at some point to have some sort of impact on the entire process. I'm sure that libertarians, because they are registered that way, are probably more engaged in the voting process and participation. So that is without a doubt a problem that you don't have. But the problem that you face right now is that there are so few of you that it's just, from a polling perspective, that's the reason why it's almost insignificant. And I don't want to marginalize it, but that's what I look at. I do ask libertarian because you are a registered party in this state, and we do find about half of 1%, but that's about it.
A question in the center here. No, we're going to have to move. We're just short of time. Thank you, though. No, go ahead.
I can hold it. Thank you. Can I hold it?
No, you can't. Thanks.
As a millennial, I work 5 different jobs, Uber, Lyft, whatever. I started working when I was 16. I paid a 7% income tax. And you know what? I'd be fine if we paid 7% income tax now. Ms. Pollard, when I graduated in 2007, we were under a Democrat rule. We didn't have 7-day school weeks. We didn't have schools putting off textbook purchases, okay? My issue is I'm paying all these taxes. As an individual, I'm working several jobs to pay these taxes. And throughout the Republican thing, they've given corporate income tax cuts or whatever. I don't know, sorry. But my question is I'm sick of the infighting and I'm sick of the backbiting. I'm sick of the two parties in Oklahoma. You know, libertarians don't get a seat to the table half the time. My question is how are we going to put away our differences, move on together as both parties, maybe work together? Because as currently as it stands, you know, I've had to explain to my father why a certain representative would give out surveys to Middle Easterns to ask questions about the religion. And I also had to make sure and tell him, yes, Father, you will be able to come back to the United States, even if Trump did sign that Muslim ban. You are a citizen.
So
and that's my biggest issue. But my problem, and that's just responding to your thing.
question
My
would be,
question is, how are we going to move on together, and how are you going to encourage legislators that are in the Democratic Republican Party to work together to get us out of this mess?
Okay, good question. Ms. Langthorne, what are your thoughts in terms of how the different parties within the legislature, just in general, can work constructively together?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree that in terms of policymaking, it is hugely important for us to have civil discourse and try to come together as frequently as we can. I will say that for me as an individual, it is very difficult to talk about that sometimes or to take that approach sometimes because right now Oklahomans are literally dying because of poverty, because of failures of healthcare, because our schools are shutting down, because our roads and bridges are unsafe. And so when we're talking about people's actual lives, things get heated. And so that makes it harder to have what we call civil discourse.
Yes, and so first of all, before you even asked your question, you remember a little bit earlier, I raised my hand and said, I will take the lead, and I have reached out. I will take the lead to make our budget deficit, our budget crisis, a nonpartisan issue. This needs to be about Oklahoma finding solutions for Oklahomans. So I'll just say in the beginning that I took that leadership earlier by your question. The second thing is, Ms. Langthorne just talked about citizens dying because of lack of health care and because of lack of policies in the state of Oklahoma. I take public exception with that. I do. Oklahomans each one of us has a struggle in our life. Some of it is financial. Some of it is because of criminal justice. Some of it is because of mental health. Some of it is because of families. All of us struggle. But unless we have respectful discourse amongst each other, and we don't use these little key words that try to embrace and try to invoke some type of emotion in things. Get emotion out of it. Let's look at the facts. Again, I go back to complimenting our leadership. Right now, they are doing interim studies. They are doing case studies to find out, back to this lady's point, what is the problem. Let's take the labels off of it. Let's find the solutions to this. If I had my druthers that this year I wish there wasn't even election year, we could take it out of it and we could say you're only here to solve the problems of Oklahoman and we'll do election in another year. The real world is, yes, we are going to have an election in 2018, and the real world is you are going to look at them, we are going to look at them, and we are going to vote in 2018 by who is here to solve the problems. And I believe that Oklahomans believe the Republican Party will have these solutions.
Mr. Shepard, we had
I
a
would just
wonderful...
add one little kind of context. This side says that government is the solution. This side says that government is the problem. The reason why that we have now supermajority Republicans is that before the last 12 years that the Republicans took over, the 3 or 4 decades before that, Oklahomans began losing faith that government could solve the problems. And that's the reason why we've seen shifts and changes in our state. So again, if people change their minds and think that government is the solution, then they'll vote more Democratic. If they still think that government is the problem, they'll continue to vote Republican.
We'll take one more question. This gentleman in the second row.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm nonpartisan, so I lean either Republican or Democrat. But I think even in this panel, as we've seen a lot of rude discourse between both Democrats and Republicans, shouting out during your answers or other people's questions. And so what I want to say is, as the gentleman here asked about the question of public discourse and how we can bridge this gap that we certainly have with polarization, we've currently seen these these protests, and then some of them have formed into riots. I personally believe that possibly looking more towards answering these protesters' problems, or actually having Republicans who are dealing with protesters of the Republican side, or having Democrats dealing with the Democrats of the Democrat side who are protesting, and actually finding a way to move their discussion to a more arena-like area like this, and actually have a proper discussion between representatives of each association. So is there any way that we can make a move through Oklahoma and possibly in other areas to sort of move these protests that could be formed into riots, and then instead have more discussions like we're having here today?
Well, it goes to a similar question as before, but let me direct it first to Mr. Shepard. Is there any sign in your polling that this polarization will diminish at all, or do you just think it will continue next year in the 2018 election?
I think it's probably going to continue. I will tell you, though, that I think that some of the outrage that we see comes from a very small minority. I'll give you another piece of polling data that we just came up with. I'm not going to release it for a couple weeks, so you guys are getting really insight here. I asked, when it comes to Confederate statues or statues of Confederate leaders, do you think they should, 1, remain as a historical symbol, or 2, be removed because they offend some people? Oklahomans, overall, Republicans, Democrat, Independents, 79% said leave them alone. Now, if we have out there these mobs, these protesters, these people that want to tear down this or tear down that because it offends somebody, that type of outrage is going to continue. But is it representative of Oklahomans? It's not. So that I'm just, as the pollster, I ask the question, that's what it comes back. So yes, I think it'll continue. 1, it won't be productive, but in all honesty, it's not representative of Oklahomans.
Ms. Langthorne, let me put a twist on the question. In the gubernatorial race, do you think any of the candidates, the Democratic candidates, will look for ways to, well, obviously they want to win, but sort of create more of a mutual dialogue, as this guy is suggesting, rather than just pound on the opposition?
I think that our candidates, and I think this goes actually both for both parties, are generally open to discourse most of the time. I think that candidates try to stay above the fray and engage with voters. So yes, I think that the Democratic gubernatorial candidates will welcome every opportunity to participate in dialogue.
Okay. Ms. Pollard?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question, because again, we have to remember, at the national level, we're all Americans. At the state level, we're all Oklahomans. What makes it partisan is our policies, our views on things. But as humans, as people with emotions and feelings and the things that we stand for, absolutely, we need to remember we're Oklahomans first. So specifically in what you're saying, I want to follow the lead of our Senator James Lankford. He often has people come to his office. He sets aside at least one day a week to open his doors to anyone who would like to come and talk with him. He doesn't care what side you're on about anything. It is open dialogue and open discourse. And I am very proud of the leadership he has taken on that. And I will say, at our Republican Party offices, I will follow his lead and be willing to openly discuss with anyone the problems we have here. Because again, I'll say for about the umpteenth time, because I really, really believe this, and I believe our party believes this, our solutions are for Oklahomans, not Republicans or Democrats.
Thank you for coming. Please check out oklahomawatch.org. This is only the start of the conversation about many months of the campaign leading to the primaries next June, and I think the November 6th election. So be involved, be informed, and we're thankful that you came tonight.